It was actually experience of poor management. I was kind of like, if they can do it, then I definitely can. I built up the business from the ground up. You got to make something out of nothing. One of the strongest marketing channels that I stumbled upon in that process of not having any budget was my personal brand. It's one of the most powerful sales and marketing channels that doesn't cost you anything. Be you, because everyone else is taken. You are your own USP. They are cliches for a reason. I was like, what else am I going to pimp out? So number one, the absolute golden rule.
Welcome to the Pantrium Podcast. Here, there's no fluff and no sales pitches, just real conversations. I'm your host, Kristensen, and at Pantrium, we bring together bold and curious founders and leaders to share their stories, their lessons they have learned, and the hard truth behind their success. We are all about challenging the status quo and explore fresh perspectives while focusing on what really matters: people. If you're craving deeper conversations, you're in the right space. So let's dive in.
Steph, thank you so much for joining the Pantrium Podcast. I've been dying to bring you on. I know you're a podcaster yourself, so I am very thrilled to bring you on to my podcast.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And like the first thing I often ask my guests about, kind of leading into this conversation, is about sharing a fun fact. So Steph, what's your fun fact?
I love so much that you open with this fun question. My fun fact is that I can rap. Well, I used to be able to rap the full version of Rapper's Delight by Sugar Hill Gang. So if anyone doesn't know, I'll give you a tiny taste, because I feel like you can't just drop that fun fact.
I'm putting these far into my ear.
So it's the song that goes, I said a hip hop. You hip it to the hip, you said a hip hop, you don't start rocking. Okay, that's as much as I'm going to do. But the full version of that song is like 15 minutes. And it's funny you gave me the heads up before on like what the fun fact kind of represents, to get to know a little bit about me as a person, because it's kind of funny because I usually have that as my like canned response as my fun fact. But you made me actually connect. Oh, what is it? What does that actually represent about me? And number one, my love for 70s disco funk music, and then I think another couple of other things. I think the other thing is like just being a performer. I wanted to be an actress since I was a little kid, and a perfectionist as well. So like the attention to detail, learning the lyrics, getting them exactly right. So I hadn't actually thought about how much that fun fact represents more about me, but there we go.
Speaking of, like you were saying, you wanted to be an actress. Can you tell me a little bit more about your career journey and some of the challenges that you have overcome through your career?
Yeah, so I never took the actress thing super seriously, because as much as I had the burning desire to be an actress since I was really little, I gave up on that dream one particular morning when I was 15 years old on the playground of my school. I remember perfectly the moment. I was 15. I just had this huge drop in self-esteem, just like out of nowhere. All of a sudden was like, wow, what the hell have I been smoking? And so then I was like, I need to get real. I need to get a bit more sensible. And I remember reflecting on like, what am I naturally good at? What am I passionate about? What do people compliment me on the most? And I was always the top of my class with art. So I was like, I'm really good at art. I'm really good at drawing. Like, is there something there? So I went to art school, and I remember my logic was like, oh, how cool would it be to just sit around and draw all day and get paid for it? That would be amazing. But I was so naive. I wasn't stupid, but just so naive. I should also mention that I grew up on a desert island. Okay, so I wasn't like, what's his face? Tom Hanks and Castaway, like spearfishing, like, survival. No, it was technically, I guess it's a volcanic island, but desert island sounds better. It was one of the Canaries, Lanzarote. So I didn't have like work experience, internships. And then the first proper job I got was as an admin assistant. And I remember this perfectly. It was on 15K a year, pounds, which worked out after taxes and everything, worked out to about 900 and something pounds per month, like take home. I remember my rent at the time was like 400 or 500, so already like half of that. I just remember like everything perfectly about that time. But it didn't matter because I wanted to get my foot in the door in the creative industries. And it was this admin assistant role was at this boutique design agency. And I was like, and every day I brought in my portfolio, my illustrations, my artwork. And I remember my boss at the time just kind of like patting me on my head and being like, yeah, like, okay, like, great, we get it, like, get on with your job. Whilst I was pushing for that one particular career direction, to be an illustrator, to be an artist, to be a graphic artist, commenced officially my career as this admin assistant in this agency. And that, Christie, honestly, that opened my eyes to this whole new world that I did not know existed. I was 22 years of age at this point, and I remember so perfectly the first week on this job. There was a 1 week handover with the other girl that had been doing the job before me as like a summer temp. And she took me to go with her to visit Coca-Cola. Like, what? Head office. How does Coke have an office? Like, I was so completely naive. Like, I didn't know anyone in the industry. I'm like this art school student from a desert island. Like, what? And it blew my mind. And we got on the Metropolitan line all the way to Uxbridge. And it was Coca-Cola Red, which is Pantone 485C. And everything was like Coca-Cola red colored, and the bottle shape was, everyone was like, it was like a theme park for Coca-Cola. My mind was so blown. You can tell because I can still remember all these years later. And I think LinkedIn was kind of new at this time as well. So I was like, I can search these people, like, who works at Coca-Cola? Like, that's their job, and I can contact them. It was just like so mind-blowing, genuinely. And so I just like sunk my teeth so deeply into this world of brands and marketing and all this stuff. And I remember, because I was so excited and interested, I would get to the office as early as I possibly could. I would get to the office at like 7 a.m. And then I remember the cleaners would kick me out of the office at like 7 p.m. I was just hungry. I was so hungry. And then classic, like, obviously start working my way up. I get promoted. I'm discovering this whole other career trajectory. And I remember getting really busy and starting to feel the pressure and loving it. And it was at that moment of, a few months into my job here, I got finally an opportunity. I was commissioned to do an illustration from one of the clients. So this thing that I'd been pushing from the start, like bringing in my portfolio, say I'm an illustrator, I'm an artist, blah, blah, blah. And like that not happening as quickly as I wanted it to, discovering this other path in the meantime, I just built myself up in this agency. And I basically went from this admin assistant on 15K a year to being like head of business development. I mean, it was a small company, but within only a few years, and I brought in a third of the business at this small agency, and I was responsible for like another third of it. And it was like a big chunk for this young woman that had just like gone in with her drawings. So you've allowed me to indulge a bit of memory lane on that. So I appreciate you kind of listening and bearing with me. That's just that's my entry, like formally into my professional career. I got my foot in the door at the small agency, basically worked my way up, went on to a bigger company, which was advertising, did more great stuff there. After so many years working agency side, I was so desperate to work in-house. So after clients barking their orders at you all the time, you're like, I want to be on that side of the fence. And so you asked me also, part of this question is like failures and what I learned along the way. One of the failures is where I was so desperate to go in-house. I also have such high, like, objectives, like such big goals. Not only did I want to go in-house, but I wanted to go in-house in marketing, in fashion, and like good top fashion brands. And I don't know, to my credit, I did get a lot of interviews with the likes of Harrods, Michael Kors. They all rejected me, obviously. But I don't even know if that's like a failure, because who am I? Like I said, I'm an art school student from a desert island. I don't have a degree to my name. I don't like, who am I? I've just like hustled my way hard through agency world. And now I'm like expecting to get a top job in Harrods marketing. Like, this is every single girl's like dream job, work in fashion and marketing, all the rest of it. So it's all a matter of perspective, and we can get much more into this with my business in a bit if you like. But again, depending on how you look at it, it's like, I mean, it's amazing that they wanted to interview me and I got to the final rounds of the interview, and I now know I've heard how toxic and how horrible it is to actually work in fashion. And so maybe that was like dodging a bullet.
If we were to forward through to your recent adventure, and if you could tell us a little bit more about that for those who don't know what I'm referring to here, but also as you were venturing out on your own,
yeah,
and how did you basically take on all your experiences in the past into this new adventure?
Yeah. Okay. So listeners, for context, I didn't make it into Harrods. Pick up the story. I didn't make it in fashion. But what I did make it into was a big Chinese technology company. And it was after a year, a bit of a box check. It was like, cool, I've got that, I've got this, I've seen this. I set up my own business, which was a marketing consultancy back in 2017. And funny enough, guess what the value proposition was of my agency when I first set up the business? The marketing consultancy for fashion brands.
You were stubborn.
Okay, so when I first set up the business, bear in mind that was like 7 years ago at this point, I used to always say that it was actually experience of poor management that I'd had in the past that was the greatest motivator for me, because I was kind of like, if they can do it, then I definitely can. What I was very flippant about is how the world is set up to help some people succeed more than others. And so, as unimpressed as I was with these particular individuals, they were of a demographic profile that I do believe it makes a lot of things much easier, especially in business. So again, I kind of had like that naivety. And I think that's kind of an unexpected theme throughout these different stages of my career. And I do think that ignorance is bliss, because you wouldn't dive into some things if you knew exactly what was on the other side. Like, some you just got to go for it, like 2 feet in, and give it your best shot. And I think, like, yeah, sometimes it's not helpful to know too much. So I guess that was initially the motivation, and I guess a bit of that healthy naivety, that blind optimism, helped launch me into my business.
And what was some of the greatest experiences and lessons learned through your agency?
So through the agency, it's funny recounting the story now with you, because when I set up the business, it does feel like such a long time ago, such a chapter in my life. And it feels like it's just that continuous, and you're just focused on, this is my business, this is my venture. And it becomes so intertwined with you and your identity. And now that I'm on the other side of it, and it's been a few years, I'm kind of like, when I think all the way back to the beginning, it does feel like such a long time ago. And obviously we had the pandemic in between as well. That makes it feel even more like, wow, a completely different lifetime. Yeah. And so to answer your question, I learned so much. What would I pick out as some of the top things that I learned? I actually did a bit of a post-mortem episode on my podcast. One of the things is my risk tolerance. And on the one hand, I don't know if I was risky enough in terms of, I guess, investments, like purely financial. I don't think I spent any money on marketing. I built up the business from the ground up based on my personal brand, my personal profile, networking, hustling, social media, direct outreach. I didn't really pay for anything. But then the flip side to that is, when we did have some tough times and some rainy days, or like an unexpected bill, I knew that there was that buffer there, thanks to my financial prudence, to help us weather the storms. So I always kind of struggled with, where do you draw the line with risk tolerance in business, right? It's like, do you just go all in and you're like in it to win it, and then if it doesn't work out, you've learned a lesson? Or I think mine was a little bit more like slow and steady.
Yeah.
What's your take on sort of risk tolerance for entrepreneurs?
Now, when we're talking about marketing, I think the marketing landscape is completely changing. So right now, I think it's actually healthy to have a very creative way of thinking about, how do I actually get the most out of very little, rather that being money or resources or otherwise. It forces you to evaluate and prioritize. Because if you have nearly endless means or a lot of opportunity, you tend to also do a lot of different things. Where if you have very limited resources, then you have to focus on, okay, what helps my business today? What do I need to do today that moves that needle? And then everything else will just wait till another day. I actually think it's quite healthy to be limited in the resources, because it just forces you into areas of marketing, whether being storytelling or distribution or else, that you might not have thought about if you had a huge budget and you could more or less do whatever you wanted. I'm curious to hear now, from the ball back to you, because you had that limitation, or you came up with perhaps creative strategies, or that you did look at things from a different perspective.
I was thinking a bit of this when I was listening to you there as well. Like I didn't take out a business loan. I didn't get investment. I didn't want to or even really know how to go about doing it. So it was very much turn the cream into butter. Like, you've got to hustle, you've got to make something out of nothing. And you've got to be so prudent with your finances for a long time. Someone else basically said to me, like, can you eat shit for 3 months?
Yeah.
And they said 3 months. I was like, try like fucking like 2 years, It was very much like, it just reminds me, I had a chat with another woman in business a while ago. She came to me for help. It was such an impossible equation where she basically just wasn't prepared to make any sacrifice whatsoever for her business. I need to maybe like open up my mind a little bit more and better understand that situation. But for me, like, I'm still struggling to understand. I'm like, you can't, that something has got to give. Like, you've got to either, unless you do get investment or a bank loan or a grant, or you get some sort of external capital, then the money you make, the only other way that you're going to be able to grow the company, because I think this person was saying about wanting to hire someone and needing investment for it and everything else. But like, you're going to have to take a pay cut. You're going to have to look at cost efficiencies where possible. I don't know. I mean, like, that's not the way it needs to be done. I don't know if someone's got a better idea, then let me know. But that's what I had to do. I had to take a pay cut. So yeah, so I basically ate shit for a long time, and I worked tried to just, as I say, churn that cream into butter, find clients, say yes to more opportunities than you can handle, figure it out later. And coming back to your point on the creative constraints and how the limitations can force you into, I totally get what you mean, because like, if you have too much, it just breeds wastage, and it just like, it doesn't move the needle. It's just vanity. But I think with me, one of the, I guess, blessing and a curse, depending on your perspective, is one of the strongest marketing channels that I stumbled upon in that process of not having any budget was my personal brand. And this was before the term personal brand even existed. And it was because I was like, what else am I going to pimp out? Like, I've got me and my website. Like, look at me or look at my website. And I'm more interesting than my website. So talk to me. Yeah. So I love posting. I love creating content. I know so many people are like, oh, I don't like social media. I can't stand it. Like, I love it. I post really regularly. And so the blessing is that you build up, it's one of the most powerful sales and marketing channels that doesn't cost you anything. The downside to that, though, is, as a business owner, is that your brand becomes so intrinsically linked with you and who you are. So the first hurdle, number one, is that for me, I had a really big chip on my shoulder convincing people that I was not just a freelancer and I had a team and this is an agency I'm building out. That was just ego. That was pure me and my ego. But then as you go further along, as you start to consider, like, if you want to exit the business, then you've kind of created that, like, that interlink for yourself. So everything's got a price to pay, right?
Yeah. And if we look at today, you know, these experiences, and now we're saying also you were kind of discovering the power of personal branding or in content creation. How did that influence your recipe of success for your business today?
Okay, so actually this is another level of like an unexpected advantage that I didn't realize, is that your personal brand is like your insurance. And the good thing about it is, as long as you don't have like a damaged profile, a damaged reputation or whatever, that will follow you around. And for me, like it's like an insurance policy. So regardless now, like now my personal brand, I mean, my last business doesn't exist anymore, so people just know me, but I've now kind of got this platform, if you like. And now when I want to launch something new, or with my podcast or my public speaking or consulting or any other new business I'm going to launch in the future, I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for that at the moment.
And tell me a little bit more about that. So, you know, when you are now utilizing your personal brand, what has been some of the biggest learnings or lessons you have learned that you would advise others to think about or definitely consider?
Number one that immediately springs to mind is it's as much about the offline as it is the online. So people think that it's all about social media and it's what you post, and if you've got time for the engagement as well, that can still work. But most of the people who support me now, who I see are always watching my stories, always engaging, always commenting on my posts, they're also people like you and I, who we know for real. We've met in real life, in person. We've had a real conversation. You know, you can message me. I can do the same. Like last night as well, I was chatting fairly late last night with another business friend of mine, and they've got a mid-roll ad in my podcast. They've got a package of podcast episodes where they've got an ad. And so there's that invested interest, and we've got the relation. So it's kind of like these things aren't manufactured. None of it is manufactured. You have to put in that work. And that's where I think you do get those buzzwords like authenticity, because the way I am now with you is the way I am, like, sat across the bench from you in Tech Barbecue, in the same way that I hope I am on a stage in front of thousands of people. It's like, it is me, it is who I am. That's got to kind of translate through to everything. So I think maybe coming on to a second tip as well there is, people now are so that people, like, online consumers are savvier than ever before. And if you sound and look like everyone else, they're just going to tell. So people know what I sound like. People know my style, my tone of voice. I actually wrote, I was helping out a friend as well. I was helping her with writing some LinkedIn posts. And she was like, oh my God, like, you're so, like, obviously this comes so naturally to you. Obviously I've done it every single day for the past like 8 years at this point. I was like, you still need to put it in your word. And she was saying, she's like, oh my God, as I'm reading, I can like hear your voice as I'm reading it. But so you still need to make it sound like you. So I guess that does still fall into that authenticity buzzword as well. But I don't just want it to be the buzzword. It is be who you are. And you've got all the cliches around that as well, right? Be you, because everyone else is taken. You are your own USP. They are cliches for a reason. So I'll just leave it on those two top tips for now. Real connections, real relationships. It's as much of the offline as it is the online. And secondly, it very is like, be yourself, embrace your personality, write almost the way that you speak. it's easier to do it in personal brand than it is in company brands, right?
Yeah. And if someone sits out there and are saying like, oh, I don't know about this personal branding, or I'm new to it, but I would actually like to do more of it. I want to also start being more verbal. How do one go about that? Like, what would your advice be for someone who are curious and kind of want to get started?
Great question, Christie. Well, this I definitely don't need to tell you twice as a fellow marketer, but the absolute golden rule, number one, is the majority of the word marketing, market. Who is your market? Start there. I had this day in, day out, as you can imagine, with my last company, the marketing consultancy. The word marketing, it's got like every other connotation under the sun, right? I think maybe we spoke about this before, where like you say the word marketing and people think like social media, like digital funnels, like performance, all the channels and tactics. We've all forgotten about the basic. Who's your customer? Like start there. And it's in the word market. So start there. Everyone jumps on like, do I need to be on TikTok? Do I need to be on LinkedIn? Do I need to do this, that? It's absolutely pointless if your target audience isn't on any of those platforms. So that's the first thing. For me, my top two channels are LinkedIn and Instagram. LinkedIn makes complete sense from a business perspective. And Instagram, for me, there's a little bit of that spillover. I'm very much in the creative industries. And for me, it is very much a creative outlet as well. And I enjoy it. So that kind of segues on to the next point. So first of all, where's your market? Where are they hanging out? Use that to guide. Don't just like jump on anything for the sake of it. Moving on to the channels, don't try and bite off more than you can chew. I've been helping a few people as well that are like, I need to be on Facebook and email and LinkedIn and this, that. And I'm like, who's going to be doing all of this? Yeah. I'm doing maximum 2, and I'll try and post some other bits and bobs here and there if I can, but you're better off just focusing on like 1 or 2 channels and doing them well. In terms of posting content, I already mentioned about, embracing your personality, being who you are, but also with that self-reflection is what do you also enjoy doing? Because I love writing. I'm not necessarily like a copywriter, but it's something that comes very naturally to me. So that's one of the reasons why I love LinkedIn, because it's still, yes, you still need to post a selfie to get your post like visible on the feed, but it's still predominantly text-based, right? So if you think Instagram's very visual, TikTok, YouTube, they're video first. Threads is like X these days, it's short film copy. So it's kind of like the last place where you can still write a decent amount. You can pre-schedule through the platform as well, so it makes it nice and easy. And if you want, you can easily kind of attach other media to it. And actually, I would highly recommend you need to add a picture to your LinkedIn post to get it visible. Unfortunately, it's the way it is. But if you really enjoy the videos, or you just want to get out and do a selfie and do a quick 30-second piece to camera, then like lean into what you do enjoy, because the final point is the consistency part of it as well. So that's also why you need to limit the amount of channels, because part of doing them well is to consistently execute. And so that doesn't mean that you have to post every single day. That's not what consistency means. If you decide to post every Tuesday, that's fine, once a week, as long as you're consistent with it. So pick a hand, like start off with where your market's hanging out to make sure that it's relevant, it's strategic, that your content is going to be seen by the right people. Secondly, limit your number of channels, so don't bite off more than you can chew. Lean into the sort of content that you enjoy creating anyway, and be consistent with it.
Good little checklist to go through and use. That's super helpful, I must say. I'm curious, when you're saying this concept of looking offline, and growing your network and engaging with people offline, because they will also be your ambassadors and cheerleaders online. What has been some of those interesting aha moments, something that have stood out to you from that offline piece?
Okay, I'm just going to go with the first answer that comes to mind here, and it is kind of amazing. And it's not a humble brag, but it kind of is. It was through my podcast. I experienced for the first time in my life, when was it? Maybe about 6 months ago or something. Oh my God, Christie, I experienced for the first time in my life what it feels like to be famous. Really
Tell me more.
weird, really weird, where I was at an event and somebody, a stranger who I had never met before, recognized me. And they made an effort to like come over and see me. And yeah, so they recognized me, they came over and they loved my podcast. And they told me which episode they listened to and how much they loved it. True. But like, I treat this one fan just like, absolute VIP, and I think this is where it's really easy to be like, oh, this is again where the ego can so easily come in, right? Because you can be like, oh, like I'm the one with the show. I'm the one being recognized. I feel famous. My heart was so full of gratitude. Just like the fact that not only just to begin with, that they'd listen to the podcast, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. But then the fact that they recognized me, and then on top of that, they wanted to come over. And then on top of that, they just had such lovely things to say. I was just like, yeah, even just from remembering it now, I can feel like my heart swelling up. And whenever I see her name come up, so she's left comments on YouTube videos and I see her on Instagram and stuff as well. She's the one who I'm like, I want to give the special treatment to, so I want to like flip that power dynamic a little bit and just be like, oh my God, you're amazing. Like, so that was super special.
Because also, she could easily not have done any of that or any of those efforts and just being an observer from afar.
1,000%.
And it's just like really recognizing those people who also go that extra mile and also to your point, like she's your customer, she's your VIP, she's your biggest fan. And again, that's probably where word of mouth comes in as well, like support and how do you treat others, because good deeds go far.
Exactly. Yeah, totally right.
So as we are kind of coming to the end, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's focus on the future. And from your point of view, what would you like to see change in the sector or in the industry? That could be everything from trends or behavior you're seeing.
Such a great question. So thankfully, I have already been thinking a little bit about this one. There are two big things I'd love to see change. One in the entrepreneurial world and one that's in the marketing world. And they kind of go hand in hand. I'll do the marketing one first. Marketing I mentioned before about some of the connotations and what everyone else thinks that marketing means. I think that marketing has had such an over-reliance on performance marketing in recent years. And I just find it really annoying how, because something, there's a great quote, I think if Einstein even said it, it's probably just completely made up, but I think there's a quote which is, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And it really rings true here when we talk about different marketing tactics, because just the fact that you have a dashboard and you have analytics and you can download a spreadsheet does not mean, I just feel like there's such an immediate, like, oh, that's the gospel of truth because it's numbers on a screen, it's black and white. And it forces us all into, whether you are in a marketing team or you're a startup founder, into this very short-termist thinking. It's very much, what was the cost per click on this? What was, like, how many leads did we drive this week? And I think that part of that mentality, and this actually sort of links into the personal brand thing as well, part of that mentality also fosters an over-obsession with the numbers, with the metrics and everything else. And we get sucked into this other way of thinking that isn't the real world. And we forget about how real people engage, interact, shop, how buying behaviors have changed. And I was actually talking to an amazing AI founder the other day, and we were talking about the ways that buying behaviors have changed. We actually sort of realized together that there is all this amazing advanced technology to be able to deliver or to serve the right ad at the right time, in the right place, to the right person. But the downside of that is, I said before, everyone is getting savvier these days. People think we live in Big Brother because everyone thinks our phones listen to us. We talk about something, we open our phone and we see an ad for it. Like, does that mean that it's really sophisticated, effective marketing? It's the sort of stuff where the words on the paper sound great, but you put it into the real world and you're like, the real people are just, they're scrolling on Instagram or TikTok while they're in the bathroom. And they're like, oh, I was just talking about that. That's weird. And they don't like it, right? So anyway, so I think that that's a whole sort of can of worms around performance marketing, the data. I don't prescribe to like data-driven anything. I don't do data-driven anything. Data-informed, yes. It's another data point. But we can't ignore all of this other stuff, all this other research and expertise and knowledge. And I really do think that marketing needs to be rebranded. I think marketing as a discipline needs to be called like consumer psychology or behavior economics instead of marketing, because it's more accurate. It stops us falling into these other traps. I think that would also command more respect internally from other departments within the business, or indeed clients who don't get it. So that's my beef with marketing.
You yourself, you have endless of fruitful discussions with people. Who do you turn to? Who do you follow that inspires you and challenge your own viewpoints?
That's a great one. I think for me, the answer to this has to be the same as the question around like mentorship as well, right? Like, who do you go, like, who's your mentor? Do you go for advice? It has to be, as Prof G, Scott Galloway, as he says, who is one of the people who I do look up to. He calls it a kitchen cabinet of advisors, of people. So it's a mix of things. And I think especially with the last point of your question there around like challenging viewpoints, it has to be other people that like you don't agree with, that you don't see eye to eye with. So I think the same applies with social media. Is like make sure you're following other accounts that you don't necessarily agree with, just so that at least you are exposed to these different viewpoints and you're living in this echo chamber. But I have a lot of people that I look up to, I admire, Scott Galloway being one of them. And funny enough, what I'll also just really quickly mention is it happens to also just be like a lot of guys in that as well, like a lot of men. And I know there's the whole, see her, be her representation with female role models. And thankfully, we've got so many more than we used to. But yeah, I don't know. I think I've always really vibed with like, I used to fangirl over Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V. I'm over him now, but he was like my first like business inspiration. Yeah, just such a huge mix.
I really like your comment there. Follow people you don't agree with and widen your own ecosystem almost. I really like that.
Have you heard of a documentary called The Dark Side of Social Media?
The one I'm thinking of, which might not be the one you're thinking of, but I'm thinking about The Social Dilemma.
That's the one. That's it.
Okay,
yes.
good.
Well done. Yeah, that's the title. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, because what I loved about that, I mean, none of it was any surprise. I'm sure it wasn't to you either in marketing. It was funny, like anyone else not in marketing when that came out was like, yeah, But what I loved about it was at the end, they actually give really practical, tangible advice. So I love that at the end, they gave those really practical tips. Like they've scared you and they've fear-mongered how social media works. And that was one of the big ones that they said, like, make sure you follow people that like you don't agree with, that you don't like, because we have to have a bit more of that representation of the real world in our online worlds.
Yeah. And just to add to that with The Social Dilemma, I saw it and I thought it was super interesting. And we had some conversations in the office afterwards and we were discussing the strategy of Netflix behind that, because their biggest challenge is and the biggest gain would be time. And who is in the digital media taking time away from them in order to win that game, right? That's the social media platforms. I enjoy thinking about why are people doing what they're doing or businesses doing what they're doing, because what's their strategy?
That is very insightful, Christie. And just to build on that a step further is another little tidbit, piece of advice for your listeners as well, is your competition might not always be like your direct competitors, like your point with Netflix. Netflix competition is the face scrolling on your phone. We've got double screening. So there's a great concept, I'm sure you know, the Jobs to Be Done concept by Kristensen. And it's a really powerful exercise. I won't go into it now because we don't have enough time, but it helps you to understand what's the job, in air quotes, not literally, but like what's the job that your product or service is being hired to do by your customer. And looking at it through that lens helps you to then also understand who then is the competition. Honestly, read into it to the listeners, like Clay Christensen, Jobs to Be Done. There's a fairly short video on YouTube as well. Definitely watch it because it just is a really powerful shift in it. It shifts us back. It's like I was saying, it shifts us back into the consumer's position. And that's where we always need to be.
Couldn't have said it better. I totally agree. Now, when we're speaking about all these great things and like putting yourself in the shoes of the customer, what do you think will define the next 5 years?
Oh, I mean, I'm rolling my eyes before it's even come out my mouth. You know what I'm going to say. Everyone's so sick of it. It's 2 letters. You can guess it.
Yeah. I have really enjoyed it. I want to have one last question for you before I let you go, because this has been such a pleasure. Who has been a leader or a manager or a colleague or a companion in your life that had made a big impact on you?
You know what? If I was in another room, I can go and get the photo of them. My first boss, called Simon Baker, who's no longer with us anymore, so rest in peace. He is the first boss who took me under his wing when I was the ripe young 22-year-old, fresh out of art school. It's the same guy who took a chance on me, who gave me my first proper job, and who really launched my career and mentored me along the way. When I tried to really unpack what was it about him that, you know, Maya Angelou, no one remembers what you said, they remember how you make them feel. And he so naturally, genuinely, really just cared about you and made you feel really special. So yeah, definitely Simon Baker.
That is a beautiful way to finish. I absolutely love that. Again, Stephanie, I really appreciate your time and for you to come here on to the Pantrium Podcast and sharing all your experiences with the listeners and myself. I've really enjoyed it, and so many good nuggets and advice. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, this has been great. I hope I've made some sense in all my ramblings, but I appreciate it. And well done you for managing me. I know I go off on tangents, but you're an excellent interviewer. This is a great show. I'm really happy to be here.
If this episode gave you something to think about, I'll be really grateful if you could share this with your LinkedIn network. And to make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes, simply follow Pantrium wherever you are listening or watching. And just a note, the opinions and views shared by our guests are entirely their own and don't necessarily represent the businesses they work for. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, bye for now.